and to be invited day by day to witness and reenact that systematic massacre was very disturbing indeed. There were, as I say, mornings when I arrived in a state of acute anger and rage. I think probably the energy that drove my performance, as well as the friendship and the comradeship of Stephen and my fellow actors, I think that the main thrust of my work during Schindler's List was rage and indignation. And then, of course, when the rage in me subsided, perhaps towards the end of the day, what took the place of rage was a grief that I had never experienced before in my life. About 3 months after I'd finished filming. Now, there's no role in my repertoire at all that has stayed with me for that long. And I think it is something to do with the 6 million dead. I think it's something to do with being a voice for them. And when you are carrying that message from them to the world, and you carry it solidly and willingly for 3 months, I guess, because we're only human and we're only frail, that a lot of that message will stick. I felt that after I left Poland, there were many, many millions of souls that were still pulling at my sleeve, saying, what about my story? And what about my little boy? And what about my father and my mother and my family? A real pull from something that still is there in Poland. In a sense, I'm sorry to say that the streets still are haunted, and we were, I'm sure, in our filming, tapping into some extremely powerful forces that were still very present in the air. Let me give you one very, very simple example. There was a scene early on in our filming which we had, for scheduling reasons, to stop shooting. It was just at that point where the winter was ending and the spring was beginning, and there was a great deal of snow on the ground. And Stephen was quite anxious that in 2 months' time he would have to bring the snow machines in, and he would have to recreate a very, very vast area of white over the landscape of Poland. 2 months after we'd done our snow scene, we arrived that morning, and the snowflakes began to fall from the sky at a time of year where it never snows in Poland. What I'm saying in no uncertain terms is that that snow on that day was, of course, a minor miracle, and we had many, many instances where we absolutely knew that the urgency with which we were telling our story was of the utmost priority. And I think it was that sense of urgency throughout the 3 months that we were there, 4 months that we were there, as I say, as well as the rage and the grief, that kept us engaged with our work. But your observation is absolutely correct. It did take a long time to get back to myself after that. Royal Shakespeare Company in 1967, I was invited to exercise my voice, my body, my mind, my imagination, my intellect in the context of some of the greatest writing in the world, that of William Shakespeare. And throughout my years with that company, I was able to develop my craft and engage myself with larger and larger roles, which is the ambition of young actors. They want the roles to get bigger, not smaller. And eventually, in 1975, I was able to play Hamlet in Hamlet. Prior to that, I was in King Lear in a relatively minor capacity, and I was in other of the great Shakespearean comedies, history plays, and tragedies. And I think it was those years and that work with that company and that extraordinary repertoire that gave me a tremendous stamina, because when you are a Shakespearean actor and you take on the major roles, and I've since performed Othello for the Royal Shakespeare Company, and that was that was the last time I was on stage. That was 9 years ago. It's a long time now. But it was that work with that company that gave me the kind of stamina as a marathon performer that really sustained and supported me throughout the early days of my film career. I began my film career, the major section of my film career, with a film called Gandhi, and I had the title role in that film. But I was able to absolutely, unquestionably, I was able to draw upon my experience as a Shakespeare actor, and to have some kind of a grasp of the man caught on the epic landscape of history. And certainly my work in Schindler's List and my work in other films has been very much sustained, I think, by my work with the Shakespeare Company. Although, as I say, I haven't done any Shakespeare now for nearly 10 years, that grounding, that initial work, where you use your intelligence, your imagination, your body, your voice, your every skill to bring these huge issues to light. And Shakespeare does write about huge issues, usually love, life, and death, nothing less, in nearly all of his plays. Mortality and the quest for some kind of fulfillment, but generally on a huge scale, and debated with the most resilient, lyrical, and articulate and poetic language I've ever come across. So I think mainly when you ask about my work in the larger scale films that I've done, like Schindler's and like Gandhi, I would certainly say that it was Shakespeare that I find sustains that side of my stamina and that part of my imagination.